With all due respect, that's a bunch of malarkey. This is a bunch of stuff, deal.
What does that mean, a bunch of stuff?
Well, it means it's simply inaccurate.
It's Irish.
Exactly, it is. We Irish call it malarkey.
Thanks for the translation.
No, we Irish call it malarkey.
You know what this is? Yeah, and I reserve this word for those rare instances when it's truly deserved. This is malarkey.
That's a bunch of malarkey.
Direct from the King Spring Studios in beautiful Smyrna, Georgia. This is a bunch of malarkey. Now, here's your host, the incredible Charlie McMahon.
And thank you to the legendary Scott Shannon for that wonderful introduction, which never gets old, by the way. And thank everyone for tuning in to yet another episode of A Bunch of Malarkey as we cruise into the second week of June. People enjoying those pools, or are they after last week's episode? It's been like a rainforest here in the Atlanta metro area anyway, so if the pea-sized crap isn't keeping you out of the pool, the rain surely is. 7,500 of you tuned in last week as we discussed all that crap in the pool and all that kind of stuff. So I'm wondering, how many of you thought twice about jumping into that pool last week after listening, or just flat out refused to go into that pool? Well, my guest today said she was a bit traumatized by last week's pool statistics and facts. Her name is Claire, and she joins me here in the King Spring studio. Welcome, Claire.
Hey, Charlie. I'm so happy to be here.
And I am happy to have you. It's been a long time in the making, I guess.
It has.
Now, Claire's husband, Benji, he's been on the show.
He has, and it's one of my favorite episodes of A Bunch of Malarkey.
You better say that, right?
Yes.
Because he's listening. So what traumatized you about, I know you said it was a little disturbing last week, that whole pool thing. What disturbed you about it?
Oh, my gosh. So I'm riding in the car, which I love to listen to A Bunch of Malarkey in the car. And I'm just sitting there going, oh, God. And often when I'm listening to A Bunch of Malarkey, I'm usually, when I hear your stories, I'm like, Charlie, oh, my God. Like, as if you were actually with me. So last week, I think it was learning about if the smell of chlorine is really strong, that means a lot of action's taken place.
Absolutely. It activates it.
Yes, it was so traumatizing. And some of the other stuff that I couldn't possibly say out loud.
It's kind of like those scratch and sniff Snickers.
Oh, God.
Once you start scratching and the aroma comes out, you know something's going on.
Something really bad.
But your husband, Benji, he goes in the pool a lot, he told us.
He does, yeah. He swims every single day. And
it didn't faze him.
Didn't faze him a bit, because he really believes that your immunity is strengthened by exposure to all number of germs.
I could see to a degree, but now if you were listening to that episode last week by the pool and Memorial Day weekend, or just a regular weekend, you were ready to go in that pool and you heard that, would you have thought twice?
Oh, absolutely. Even just the thought of sunscreen and deodorant and all that kind of stuff just traumatized me.
What about the whole poo thing? Would you look at people now and say they probably are carrying like a pea-sized?
Yeah, and I have to get that out of my head.
That's the biggest
Someday.
comment. That's the biggest comment we got last week by many people on Facebook and email and social media, is that now they're picturing every person with some sort of pea type thing.
Thanks for opening that door, Charlie. Thank you.
So, folks, if you're enjoying the pool, just jump in. You know, like Benji said, maybe you're building up an immunity of some sort. Now, Claire, when you I got a great story to tell. Like, we always start off with like things that have happened over the past week or so. When you have a workman or a work person, work woman, a technician come to your house to do a repair, whether it be on a refrigerator, an appliance, what's your approach? Are you the type of person that hovers over the person, engages them, or do you just open the door and say hello and let them go about their business?
I usually open the door, I over-explain the situation, and then I just let them go, and then I'll pop back in like 20 minutes and be like looking around. So, yeah, I'm sort of a hybrid.
Okay. Yeah, I like to engage and offer a drink, and, you know, you get on the guy's good side so he'll go out of his way in return. But we had this strange freezer. And we have a stainless steel refrigerator where the refrigerator is on top, double door, and the freezer is like a roll-out freezer on the bottom. Now, I understand those type of freezers give a lot of people problems over the years. We've never had a bottom-loading freezer before. So we moved in 8 years ago, and the freezer was giving us trouble immediately.
Right away.
We had a home warranty, which is a scam. I'll get into that another week. But the first guy said it was a screw. He came in, he replaced the screw. The problem was that it was creating frost in there. We were getting remember the old freezers that used to chop out the frost back in the day?
Yeah.
So first guy comes 8 years ago. It kind of fixed it, but the frost problem came back. Then we had another guy, I guess about 6 months ago, a year ago, say it was the gasket, which is that rubber seal that goes around the door that creates the seal.
Yep.
Said that he could reshape the gasket that was there. So he took it off and asked us to boil pots of water on the stove, made a total mess of our kitchen, soaked the gasket, made a mess, put it back on.
So it was full participation on your part.
Oh, it was a disaster. Puts the gasket back on. A few weeks later, frost again. So we realized maybe we need a new gasket. So, YouTube now, you can fix anything.
Oh, yeah.
So my wife decides she's going to buy the gasket for half the price the guy quoted us, and we were going to do the gasket ourselves. So she did it. Didn't solve the problem. So finally now, we talk about referrals on this show, and, it's not necessarily, you can get 100 good referrals from your neighbors, but if the wrong technician shows up and he's stupid or not good, it doesn't matter how good the company is or what the other. So this guy shows up the other day. This is about 3 weeks ago, I should say. This is the funniest thing I ever heard. Says to us, comes in, looks at the freezer and says, "Do you have a hairdryer and a tube of Vaseline?"
Oh my gosh, nothing good starts with, "Do you have a hair dryer?" And a
whenever
tube
there's Vaseline involved, you got to be leery. So we said yes. He says, "Can I have it?" So we go upstairs. We find the Vaseline. We find the hairdryer. He kind of molds the gasket a little bit and says, "Done." Like 5 minutes. So we're like, "You're done already?" He goes, "Yeah." And anytime you see a little seal, he takes the flashlight from his cell phone and he's going over. You could see the little hole. We're like, okay. $179, and that was for the basic, just the guy walking through the door. Only charge us $179, like he was doing us a favor.
And you had to provide supplies.
And I had to supply the electric, the hairdryer, the Vaseline, and whatever. I don't even know why we had Vaseline in the house, to be honest with you. I don't remember the last time I even used Vaseline
No, I know.
for
I don't
anything.
think we even have it.
But that's another story, folks, for another time. So, so the guy leaves. And I look at my wife and I go, "I feel like I need Vaseline right now. I feel like I was just violated." So 2 days later, it's frosting up again. And now, keep in mind, every time these repairmen come, I got to go out and buy 20 pounds of ice, take everything out of the freezer, put it in a cooler on ice. So I'm running back and forth to get ice. 2 days later, we call up. They go, "Okay, we're going to send the same guy back." And I'm thinking to myself, I don't want that guy. But being that he was familiar with the service call, they send him back. Now he comes back. He looks like he's in a bad mood, like because his Vaseline and hairdryer thing didn't work. He's crawling on the floor, looking under the refrigerator, coming up with all these. Takes the gasket off. Instead of putting it in boiling water this time, he asked us if we could put it in our clothes dryer. So now the thing's bouncing like I have 12 pairs of sneakers in it.
No.
Puts the gasket back on, and then he's looking. He goes, "No, I think it's one of the rollers, the tracks that's on the side. The basket's not going fully in, and it's pushing the door open. That's what's creating the frost." Okay, I'm going to order a part. It's another $100.
Oh my gosh.
It'll be here in a few days. What am I going to say? I say, okay. A few days later, the company calls us, the part's in. Long story short, they said, "What's a good window for him to come?" We picked the morning, so between 9:30 and 11. Same guy shows up 9:30, knocking on the door. No part in his hand.
Oh, no.
So I said, "Hey, what's going on?" He goes, "I got to go get your part. It's in the dumpster."
In the dumpster?
Yeah. I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, this morning I was going through all my parts and I opened the box and by accident I threw it out. I know it's still in the dumpster at my office."
So you're dealing with like the A team, like the A++ team of whatever company.
Yeah. So he leaves and go gets this open part. He comes back with a box that looks like it's been through, the Desert Storm. And comes in, he's laying on the floor. Now, I didn't want to hover. I said, just let him do. So I hear him chopping ice and drilling. I don't know what he's doing. Then he's making anti-Semitic remarks about his boss, the owner of the company, saying that they're Jewish and they're cheap and they're all this crazy stuff that I didn't want to hear. Just fix the freezer, dude, and get out of here.
Do your job.
So he claims he fixed it. He says, "Okay, I signed the credit card slip for the other 100 for the part," and he leaves. So then, out of curiosity, when I went to put the food back in the freezer from the cooler, I'm like, all he did, it didn't look like he looked like he took parts out of the freezer, but never put anything new in. And I never saw him go in that box and put a part in. So he kind of just threw the basket on these wheels on a track, but there's no more metal track and safety thing where it stops. So this guy just gutted a few parts and never, it's working now. It's not frosting. It's been a week. It's working great. Yeah. But I feel like I got taken by this guy.
Oh my gosh. And the thought that he would repair something by removing and not replacing.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
how does that work?
Well, we paid, $106 for a part, and I don't think he put in. So, folks, we got this referral. Our neighbors said they had good success with him. Like I said a million times on this, and we could do a whole show about reviews, online reviews. Maybe we will. People that have a lot of free time. The broccoli's not cooked right at the restaurant. They go home and write an essay. I don't got time for that. But there are neighbors. We all go back and forth on good experiences. And like I said, could be a company that's great. They send the wrong guy out.
It's a mess.
There goes the whole thing. So that was our freezer story. I thought our listeners like these little back and forth about these crazy people that I come into. I wish I could nominate him for our favorite segment, which is coming right up. And I guess that'll segue perfectly, right, Claire?
Yeah, I think so.
So let's get right into it.
Mutant of the Week.
Now, it's been a long time since we had a landslide winner, and that's what we had last week. The Wendy's washing weasel, the guy who took a bath in the Wendy's sink at his job, he beat the corn cob clobberer, the guy who hit his mother over the head with a corn on the cob, 75 to 25%.
Wow.
Yeah, wouldn't you? I voted for the Wendy's guy, but I wonder why it was such a landslide. You don't think hitting your mom with a corn warrants a few extra votes?
I know. Well, I think, I went to the Bunch of Malarkey Facebook page after that and took a look, and you did have a picture of the guy, and it was such an amazing picture.
Of him in the tub.
Of him in the tub. He's just like scrubbing it up.
Yeah,
in
maybe
there.
that's what did it. The
Yeah.
mugshot with the corn didn't do it, right?
No,
You think those pictures make a difference?
I do, because then you get the full visual of someone. Because I was surprised to see in the week before the box cutter
Right.
lady, she was not at all what I expected. So I would recommend to everyone who's gonna think through who their vote is for, because those things instinctually.
Right.
But definitely take a look at the picture that Charlie does each week.
So if you're a new listener, which I know many of you are, how do you vote for the Mutant of the Week? You go to our Facebook page, just search a bunch of malarkey, like the page. The poll goes up on Tuesday mornings and runs through midday on Saturday, so it gives you 5 full days to vote. And as we know, as in anything, your vote is very important, and make your vote count, make that voice heard, because we know mutants are very picking that Mutant of the Week is a very important civic duty, right? So why don't we announce this week's nominees? Claire is going to read our first nominee.
All right, mutant nominee number 1. A 63-year-old Kentucky man was arrested after he allegedly pulled a gun on an Amazon delivery driver and ordered him to rake his driveway.
Oh, my God.
Police say that Kenneth Vance confronted the driver as he left the property and pulled out a gun. Vance ordered the driver to step out of his van and handed him a rake. He told the driver, who has not been identified, to smooth out the gravel driveway, which had been disturbed by his van. The driver cooperated and was allowed to leave the property. He called 911, and police went to Vance's house, where he was taken into custody.
My God.
He was charged with wanton endangerment. I love that word, wanton.
Like a wonton, I thought it was.
Yeah. And unlawful imprisonment. The driver was unharmed, and Major Neil Johnson with the Oldham County Police told WDRB that he did the right thing by complying with Vance's demand. In this situation, he was able to remove himself from the situation safely. He was able to contact us, and we were able to take action, Johnson said. So he did everything he should to make sure he was safe. Let's call him the Amazon slave driver.
Slave
Oh
driver.
my gosh, this guy sounds so
Now,
scary.
we're in a subdivision. We've had neighbors have workmen over. They backed up. They ripped up our grass a couple of times. My mailbox is leaning. I'm not going to go out there with a gun until the guy fixes it.
Right. That is outrageous. Here,
That's crazy.
bring me what I want, and then do some extra work for
See,
me.
I give credit to the driver because I think I probably would have got shot. I probably would have refused.
Yeah,
I would have been like, are you kidding me, dude?
Right, knowing what we know about you, Charlie, I think you would have fought back hard.
Now, our second nominee. Now, have you ever been karaoke singing?
I have, but it's been quite a while.
I know. I used to be a regular at a couple of bars. Now, I love karaoke, and I loved when it was my turn. Sometimes I was a hog, and I put 20 slips in.
What? I can't imagine.
Well, our next mutant of the week is a Texas woman who allegedly pulled a gun on a man around 1 a.m. last Sunday because she wanted to be next at karaoke.
I can get behind this lady. I really can.
Doris Vallejo Godoy was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and unlawful carrying of a concealed weapon. The incident happened at a Mexican restaurant in Austin. Vallejo Godoy, 41, told cops she pulled out a pistol to calm the man down after he called her bad names, but didn't point it at him. So she just pulled the gun just to threaten him with it. She says she didn't point it at him.
I'm sorry, you just said calm him down, because who doesn't think calm people down with a weapon, right?
The man claims Vallejo Godoy struck him in the face, pulled out the gun, and pointed it directly at him during the argument. A waitress tried to grab Godoy from behind to pin her arms down, but she turned around and held the gun to the waitress's stomach and told her, "I will blank kill you." Probably fucking kill you. We're not a family show. According to the police affidavit, police arrested the woman and charged her for the assault and lack of a concealed handgun license. Vallejo Godoy was taken to the Travis County Correctional Complex and is being held on $60,000 bond. Let's call her the concealed karaoke kook.
Oh, yes, I love it. And what is most important that they have not told us is what songs were each of them singing.
That's what I want. See, you think like me. These are the things I want to know. When you're doing that report, was it like, well, now we know what she's singing. She's singing Jailhouse Rock or something like that. But you're right. I want to know what that's like the key to the whole thing.
Totally.
The minutia of the whole thing.
Oh, yeah, and I'm sure whatever he sang last, just pissed her right off.
So make your vote and your voice heard, folks. Poll goes up on Tuesday and it ends on Saturday. We have the Amazon slave driver versus the concealed karaoke kook.
Oh, and I know who I'm voting for, but I won't reveal.
Okay.
So, Charlie, I want to turn the tables on you and become the interviewer, and you become the interviewee.
And I'm very nervous because I don't know anything that's going to be asked.
Don't be nervous. Don't be nervous. But this is a listener request, so I hope I will do our listeners proud.
Okay.
Today. And
I'm sure you will. Whether I will or not, that's another story.
No. Well, and I said one of my favorite things is just popping on this podcast in the car and just listening to it it's almost as if you were sitting in the back seat just telling me stories nonstop. So I really want to dig down into a couple things. I want to talk about the book a little bit more. I want to talk about the podcast a little bit.
Sure.
And I want to really do a deep dive on who is Charlie. Let's call it Inside Charlie. So we're going
Should I lay on the couch?
Probably. I think that would probably get you to open up a little bit more.
All right, so here goes, folks. You may never want to listen to me again after you hear how I tick, but here we go.
I think people are going to enjoy it.
Okay.
So I wanted to start talking about the book. So A Whole Lot of Shenanigans, which hopefully all of you have purchased and read all the way through. It's a fun read. And one of my favorite things about A Whole Lot of Shenanigans are the stories where you so perfectly give people exactly what they deserve. And I'm thinking specifically of your stories about Runty Rod, the intercepted interviewee.
Right.
Grumpy Granny, where you dump the trash in her
lap.
And we all want to be that person. And I am not brave enough. I'm the person who inside is just like boiling with rage, but just doesn't do that. And you are that person. You are that person for the rest of us, Charlie.
Right.
So remind us a little bit about these different stories and tell us how you think of these things so quickly, like right on the spur of the moment. And then I would love to know, how can the rest of us begin to work this muscle and develop
Well, I think some things you have to do subtly because there are laws out there where you don't want. But I always tried to, everything I did at the parking lot, I guess, was in the realm of, in the confines, I should say, of the law. So I didn't do anything that if somebody filmed it, nowadays you have to assume when you're out in public that you're being filmed.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether it be by a cell phone or whether it be by a closed circuit camera. So I would do things just to show people that they weren't going to come into that courthouse parking lot where I worked and get away with whatever they wanted. Now, little things you have to let go. You have to pick your battles. But that Runty Rod guy, I call him, he had pulled up that morning in a giant pickup truck. And he was idling for a long time, and it was filling up this little booth I sat in with smoke, with exhaust emissions. And I nicely and politely went out to him, and I said, "Sir, can you please shut your engine off or move the vehicle because you're filling up my booth. I can't breathe. The other customers are complaining." And he basically cursed me out and told me where I could go. and just kept idling. So that morning, how did I think of that? The idea to get even with him was I was listening to 80s on 8, a Sirius XM channel, and The Heat Is On by Glenn Frey came on, one of my favorite artists from one of my favorite bands, the Eagles. The Heat Is On was a song from Beverly Hills Cop. And I just thought of the movie, and when there was a scene where Eddie Murphy puts a banana in the tailpipe of a police car so they couldn't tail him. And I always brought a banana to work. As a snack, I brought a lot of food. But that day, I didn't have a banana. And I wanted to jam something in this guy's tailpipe, of course, where nobody could see me. I wasn't going to do it where I could get caught and arrested for vandalism or whatever. So when I noticed I had some aluminum foil, I balled it up in a nice thick ball, went out there with a broom, and when nobody was looking, I jammed it in his tailpipe, hoping that it would, prevent his vehicle from starting up. So when he came out of court, he couldn't start his vehicle a few times, kept stalling. It rolled down the hill. He thought he was driving it, but then it stalled again. And finally, when he accelerated, so impressed that accelerator down, the ball shot out of the tailpipe and almost hit 2 courtgoers. And then they got into an altercation with him, thinking he threw something at them. So he didn't get his full comeuppance, but enough to annoy him and make his morning not so good.
Just that much worse.
Yeah, so you have to do things that are subtle, that you maybe, you're not going to get caught. Then you write a book about it after it's all over with. And,
Exactly. And then put that particular story on the cover as well. So, when you're thinking of these things, is it really fast? You just come up with it right on the spot in that moment?
Yeah, I think it's the way I grew up, and it's nothing to be proud of. I think my dad was passed away 10 years ago, coming up, and he was very quiet, he would do little things to get even with people. I think I told the story where at one point when he got out of the Army, he was living with his sister and the sister's son, and the sister's son kept waking him up with the radio every morning, and my dad told him, could you not put the radio on so early? And the nephew kept playing the radio, so when the nephew went to school, my dad took the back of the radio off and cut the wires inside and then put the radio back on. So when he came home, he said, my radio died, and that was the end of the story. So he would do little things when he was younger. My mother, who is still alive, is, hot-headed Sicilian Italian. She always had to get even with people. And I always wanted to be more like my dad. Mm-hmm. But in a lot of ways, I became like my mom and my mom's father. He was the same way, where it came to wanting to get even with people. And it's I think it's a genetic thing. It's from being around it. And you would think all these years later that it would be out of the system. But I almost feel compelled that when somebody wrongs me, I have to somehow even the score, even if it's from my own personal, where they don't even know about it. As long as I know in my mind we're even, we're good.
Right. And I think it's a friend of mine, and I call this the overdeveloped sense of justice.
Right.
And I think it may be intrinsic to Italians, but at the same time, you seem to be just a complete master at
Italians, they take stuff to the grave. They might they might talk to you again and kind of forgive you a little bit, but it's never forgotten.
Oh, and I can say this as an Italian also. I can hold a grudge like nobody's business. I remember things from middle school.
Yeah.
I remember things from elementary school, and people are always surprised to hear that.
So was there ever, real quick, I don't want to turn the interview, but on Facebook, has anybody ever sent you a friend request from high school and middle school that maybe wronged you or did something wrong, and you were like, why the hell are they sending me a friend request?
Yeah, for sure. It didn't happen that much, but yeah, for sure. And I was just like, oh my gosh.
I guess they forgot.
I guess they forgot.
Yeah, I've gotten that too.
Yeah, and I've probably been guilty of doing something to somebody myself before and not remembering. But yeah, you're definitely like, are you serious?
Well, I think it also stems from, without getting, I guess that's what it's about, getting personal.
Yeah.
When I was in kindergarten through third grade, I was bullied a lot going to school. Mm-hmm. And I know bullying's a big topic in schools nowadays, and parents really. But the first 3 years of public school, or 4 years, I was kind of a bookworm, quiet kid, and I was picked on every day on the bus, punched and beaten. And then one day, I think I was in fourth grade, I was a kid that lived across the street from me who was very popular, if you call, elementary school popular, but he was kind of played sports and stuff. And one day we were standing, the bus was coming to a stop. When everybody gets out of the seat when you're approaching the bus stop?
Oh, yeah.
He just said something to me, and I punched him in the nose and bloodied his nose.
Oh, wow.
And from that day on, nobody bothered me anymore. Right. Suddenly I had respect with the other kids, and then his parents came to my parents all of a sudden and said, what's up? And from that point on, I never was bothered again in school.
Yeah,
but those first 3 years were tough.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that, because we live in a culture now where young kids are taught to quote unquote use their words and to come together, and there are no violence policies everywhere. But I have to say, I completely agree with what you did, because it gives you the confidence to go forward, and it also shows everybody else what you're made of. So
I got some street cred after that.
Yeah, exactly. Charlie with the street cred. So I also loved the story of landlords Luke and Laura from the book as well. And you helped them by sharing a story from your past. And so how can you use these powers for good? Like, share with us a little bit about Luke and Laura, and maybe another time that you used these powers of feeling like you needed justice for something good.
Well, a couple came to court, and they said that they looked very upset. And people usually told me their problems, and I asked them what was wrong, because they seemed like a nice couple. And they said that they had squatters living in one of their rental properties. They somehow pulled a scam on Craigslist or something and got into the house, changed the locks, and now squatters have rights in the courts. It takes months to get these people out. So they were so upset that they had to hire a lawyer, and they were going for the initial court date, and then they were going to have to hire a lawyer. And I felt bad for them, and I said, maybe we can get them out. I can't give legal advice because I'm not a lawyer. I can get in a lot of trouble for that. But maybe I can give you some advice on how to get these people out without going through the channels of the courts. And they said, how would we do that? And I told them a story about when I lived in an apartment. Well, I rented a house in Long Beach, which was a seaside community. And a few months after I moved in, they tore the house next door to me down to the foundation. And these construction workers were there every morning at the crack of dawn, playing music, jackhammering, and they were driving me crazy. And one morning, one of the workers rubbed me the wrong way. He came knocking on my door and told me, unless I wanted cement poured on my car, I better move it out of my driveway. Instead of saying, sir, we're going to pour cement today, could you move your car? They came in like a bat out of hell and they were tormenting me every day. So I told the guy, after I moved the car, I'm going to get even with you people. And he says, how are you going to get even with us? We got the tools. We've got a crew here, and laughing at me. So I took some speakers that I had. I've always been a music fan, state-of-the-art speakers, lined them up in the window, and it was the middle of July, hot outside. These guys were sweating out there, and I played the Chipmunks Christmas song on a loop the whole day until it drove them to the breaking point and they left.
I can't even imagine. I mean, that song, you can hear it once and be like, oh, Christmas.
Yeah, but in the middle of summer while you're trying to work over and over. And then the next time they came, this was a Saturday, Monday, the guy apologized and they started behaving themselves, and because they knew they were dealing with a nut. So I gave the guy at the court this idea to somehow get hold of speakers if they had electrical outlets on the outside and smoke these people out with music. And they knew someone who was a DJ, a friend's son, and came down there with the Chipmunks Christmas song and Macarena, 10 o'clock at night, played it. And I got this idea from Manuel Noriega, was a dictator, I think in Panama in the 80s, and to smoke him out of this embassy, they played these Metallica and all this heavy metal, and they smoked the guy out after, he lasted 7 days in there. Yeah. And I got this idea. I remember that you can torture people with noise. And it only took this couple 3 hours, and these people come out with leaf bags and vacated the premises.
Yeah. It was an incredible story. And I think you really helped them so much because they came back to you, right? And they said
the guy came back and wanted to buy me lunch, and I said, no, it's the least I could do. But you asked for another example. I can't really think of, I give little advice to friends. I can't think of something on that scale that I've done that's helped people. But I talk about it in this podcast, 4th of July, when the neighbors, you can do little subtle things.
That's one of my favorite stories.
Yeah, when it's in your neighborhood, you kind of have to be subtle because you got to live amongst these people. But there are subtle things you can do without them knowing it's you. You can, Yeah.
So because of this, reading this book, I reread it in preparation for the interview, and I just I can't believe some of, and these aren't even probably half the stories that you've experienced. You have seen the worst of humanity.
Yes.
And you've seen that, as you've shared with all of us, in your work life. You've seen it just being a resident of New York, going into the city. And so does that make it extra special when you experience something that's truly wonderful?
You mean when I see something like a good humanitarian story?
Yeah, a good humanitarian story, or somebody does something nice for you, buy you a cup of coffee. Or...
Oh, yeah. As I focused on just the bad stuff that happened at that parking lot, and I tell a lot of my retail stories, but they're, as bad as the things I've been through at the parking lot in my retail years, the great people that I've met over the years, not only that I've worked with, but there were people that came to that parking lot. If you remember Jen that came on the show last year 4 times,
Yep, she's
parked
great.
there every day. Just saying good morning and seeing her face and the small talk we'd have. And when I left, brought me cupcakes, and I had a few people that parked there bring me Christmas presents, and I saw a lot of good in people there as well. So, obviously I pulled out the crazy stuff for the fun and the humor and to write a book. But there was people want to hear those good stories. They're not funny, right?
Right.
And that's why they put it at the end of the news. They put a special interest, human interest story at the end. As bad as it is, people want to hear the crazy stuff that's going on out there. People feast on all these viral videos and stuff. So, that's why I did all that in the book. But yeah, I mean, every day for every good story, there was at least 2 or 3. For every bad story, there were at least 2 or 3 good stories that I could tell.
Yeah, and I mean, you really have some humdingers in this book. It's just so mind-boggling how people can either be, as you've pointed out, so stupid, or they can just be so thoughtless, or and for whatever reason, they think they're better than the next guy.
Right.
And I love that you have called people out on that.
I think that's our society now, and I don't think a lot of people. I think there are some people that do it intentionally. That's just how they're wired. But I think people are so distracted with technology now, and their own little bubble, their kids, their family, their own situation, that they aren't really mindful of what's going on around them in a lot of cases. I don't think that the people are necessarily doing it on purpose. I think they're just so caught up in their own little world. And I've always said that people, I think for the most part, will only take up a cause or do something when it directly affects them. Like people understand cancer is terrible, but they won't take up the cause until a family member of theirs gets cancer or a condition or something. Then they become a champion for it.
Right. I agree. Absolutely. So all of your friends have said to you that they want you to write another book. And with the podcast as an outlet for telling all of your incredible life stories, do you think you will embark on another book? Well,
this wasn't even like my first idea for a book. I've had an outline for years about the family I grew up in, the dysfunction, a lot of it's funny, a lot of it's sad, in a way. And that was going to be the first book. And then this kind of fell into my lap working at the parking lot for a couple of years. And they were stories that were fresh in my mind that I was documenting every day. So that one came easy. I do want to do another book, but I know the time, the effort that goes into it. And it's not always about money, because you're not going to get rich writing one of these books unless you get lucky or have the money to promote it. It's not like a celebrity that writes a book that can go on Good Morning America or promote their book on a radio show. So there's a lot of work that goes into it for very little reward. I mean, the reward is other people reading it and enjoying it, and that's what I got out of a whole lot of shenanigans. But I'm on the fence. I want to write another book, and I want to write that book that I initially did, but I'm kind of like, I don't think I'll do it this year.
Right. You need a little time.
Yeah, maybe next year.
Okay. So what made you choose to begin the podcast, which is a lot of work? I know you do a ton of research, and we all benefit from that. We all love listening to it. What made you choose the podcast as a place to share with people as opposed to the second book?
Well, I've always wanted to be on radio. That was a dream since I was a kid. I would have a tape recorder, cassette tape, and I would read the newspaper into the cassette like I was a news anchor. Always making recordings. I used to do my own countdowns, my top 50 songs of the 80s, and I would do like a countdown like you hear on and then play the song and edit it. So I always wanted to be on the radio. Never got around to going to broadcasting school. Life gets in the way. What does John Lennon say? Life is busy. Life happens when you're busy making other plans or something like that. So you get busy, just trying to make a living. I was out on my own at a young age, so I never pursued it. And to me, nowadays, like with anything, you want to be a singer? Put your music out on YouTube. There's ways to do things. All right, I may never get on a real terrestrial or satellite radio station, but I could do it this way. So that's why I do it. And I think radio, podcast, and I know I get this feedback from my listeners, it's very personal. It's different than TV. When you see someone on TV, you become attached to the star or the celebrity or whatever. But when you hear a person's voice on the radio, that you can take anywhere with you. It becomes part of like you said, it's almost like you're driving with me in the car.
Yeah.
And I felt like that all my life with different radio personalities and shows, and it becomes so ingrained in your routine. And I wanted to give that back to whoever was going to listen. Maybe it was only going to be 5 people. Maybe it was going to be 100. I didn't know how many people were going to tune into the show. But I wanted to give something back. The joy that I got out of radio all my life, I wanted to do that for other people. And because that was always my dream, to be on a radio. So this is my outlet.
I love that. And I feel like you really do exercise your creativity in looking for interesting stories and then sharing so much about yourself with the rest of us. And I've really loved listening to your episodes with guests. That's been one of my favorite things. And your father-in-law, Paul, is actually one of my favorites.
He seems to be a fan favorite.
He is so funny. And I loved you guys talking about the seeing someone get a pedicure in the grocery store.
Oh, that was crazy.
And I love your friend Jen, who you brought up earlier. She is so freaking funny. You guys are great together.
We got to get her back at some point.
Yes, please do. Please do soon. And I really enjoyed the episode also with Robbie Dupree. And I feel like you got him to open up about his creativity and his process and his experiences. And so I want to know who is or are your ultimate dream guests? Who is just like your long shot? And what do you want to delve into?
You mean somebody I know I'll never get on, but I wish I could?
No, maybe not even never. Just like super long shot. And what do you want to delve into?
If I had to pick 2... it would be Bruce Springsteen or Billy Joel. I mean, they would never come on a show like this. But, like you said, you never know. I think first and foremost, it would be Bruce Springsteen. And, people go to church for that religious experience. For me, you go to a Bruce Springsteen concert for that out-of-body experience. And it's not about the celebrity. It's not about just celebrity worship. It's about what his music has meant to me and to millions of others. And that's why people like Bruce Springsteen. It isn't for his voice. Even fans will tell you it doesn't have the greatest voice. But the songwriting and every song he's ever written, we can relate to something that's happened in our own life. And that's why when you go to a Springsteen concert for 3 hours or 4 hours, sometimes he'll play, you forget about everything in the world. You become a character in one of those stories, in one of those songs, and it's just an out-of-body experience for me. And I've seen him over 30 times, and I would just sit and talk about how much his music has meant to me, try to, I've already know a lot about him based on his books and his music and his interviews, but I would want to delve even further into some of the characters in the songs, more about his upbringing in New Jersey. I'm fascinated by him, his upbringing, and how he transitioned all that into his songs.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you would be amazing interviewing him because I think you have a way of tapping into people without, I could see you interviewing him very well without making him feel uncomfortable.
Right.
So I think that's one of your gifts with this podcast. So I want to switch a little pivot to some more questions about who is Charlie?
Sure.
Inside Charlie. And we'll touch back on music again soon.
Yeah, no problem.
So I want to know, I was reading this blog the other day, and they asked the person they were interviewing, what is your perfect food day? And that means time, space, geography are not constraints here. So just tell us. Food, because we all know that you love food. So tell us what a perfect food day would be from the time you wake up till the time you go to bed.
Food day. Well, really depends on mood. I mean, it's got to incorporate Italian food at some point in the day. There's got to be a pizza involved somewhere. There's got to be some pasta involved somewhere. Italian. I would probably just fly to New York. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've been here 8 years here in Atlanta Metro, and I do like it here. It's become our home. But if there's anything I miss about New York and New York City and the outlying areas is the food. I was supposed to go on a food tour of New York with my in-laws this week, but medical situations took place up there that didn't get me there this week. But I'll be going in September, and we had the whole thing planned out with food, where we're going to go.
Yeah, tell us some of the places.
The Italian bakeries, the Italian delis. There's a breakfast in New York. And I know it sounds simple, but it's the way they make it. You can't get it anywhere else. The rolls up there, the Kaiser rolls, are so different, the texture in New York, than you get in the South or anywhere else. It has like a crispiness to the outside and a doughiness to the inside, and they put bacon, egg, and melted American cheese in that thing, and they cut it in half, and the crispy bacon, that would be my morning breakfast.
Okay.
That bacon, egg, and cheese with an orange juice, cup of coffee. Lunch, pizza. Any type of New York pizza.
Yeah.
I'm really craving Sicilian pizza because you can't really get it here in the South
What's that?
too often.
I don't know what that is.
Sicilian pizza is similar. Well, I don't want to say it's similar. It's not really a deep dish, but it's a square pizza that's cut in, into the rectangles. It's a rectangular or square pizza, and it's a little bit thicker and doughier than a regular traditional New York Neapolitan pizza, and it's just so good. So a Sicilian or a regular pizza, New York pizza.
And is there a place that you really would that you love from?
There's a place called. I grew up in the town I grew up in. They're not there anymore, but I still crave that. You ever get that where you can still taste something from when you were a kid?
And most especially from the times when you were a kid, because now it could be something I had 2 years ago. And I could not remember it for
There was this place, Martino's Pizza, that I grew up in the town I grew up in. But there's also a place that's still around called Gino's in Long Beach. That they have a grandma's pizza there, which is like a very thin. It's a square pizza, also very thin crust with like a kind of like a thick tomato sauce with little chunks of tomato in it and big pieces of garlic on it, and then just little balls of mozzarella, like half melted on there.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
And it's just amazing. So any type of, and my go-to Italian restaurant in New York City, it's been there, I think, over 100 years now, is Vincent's in Little Italy. Now, if you're familiar with New York City, Little Italy used to be a sprawling section of Manhattan. Now it's only like a block. Chinatown basically encroached and took over most of Little Italy. So there's only one little string of restaurants left over there. And Umberto's and Vincent's is still there. So if you're going to New York City, got to check out Vincent's.
Oh, and what's their specialty? What do you love the most there?
Everything. The meatballs. I'm telling you, there's not a thing I don't like there. I eat any type of pasta dish, lasagna, baked ziti. It's just great.
Gosh, that's
now I'm in the mood for Italian.
Yeah, no kidding. I got you talking about it. So, and I know you love Italian sweets. So, how would you finish the day?
Either with cannoli or tiramisu.
Oh yeah, cannoli for sure.
And a nice cappuccino.
That sounds great.
So yes, I would just go to New York, one-stop shop. I wouldn't have to travel around. But I do like other cuisines. But Italian is like the go-to. Yeah, and that's the way I was brought up.
Yeah, that sounds great. So, relatedly, if you could host a cookout, because I know you love to grill.
Yes.
And it's with any 5 people. It could be 3 if you can't get to 5. But living or dead, who would you have over and what would you serve all these people?
Well, if we're talking about just, I love having you guys over and Johnny B and his wife Renee, my friends. But if I was you were talking about like a celebrity or...
Yeah, mix it up.
Living or dead, just to chat it up. Well, I want my grandfather back.
Yeah, I figured you'd say that. He was such a meaningful part of your life.
I would have him back. I would have my friend Kevin Farley, who you can see up there on the top shelf, who I have a little memorial to. He was my first boss growing up, at my first job. He passed away 11 years ago. So I would have him, just because I miss our talks. We just sit for hours talking about life and music and Bruce Springsteen and Steely Dan and delving into the lyrics and the meaning and life and talk about girls and relationships. So I'd have him back. And probably my dad. Even though he was a quiet guy and probably wouldn't add a lot to the conversation, he would love to just sit and laugh. If you told something funny, he would just break out and crack up. So probably those 3 I would have.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it says a lot about you that you choose those people as opposed to celebrities.
Right. Not that my grandmother, I don't want her to feel left out. Right. If I could get a 4th, we'd get her in there
Sure.
too.
So... as you mentioned, you have this picture of your friend Kevin, and then surrounding Kevin in this room where we're recording the podcast,
the King Spring Studios.
The King Spring Studios is filled with baseball memorabilia.
Yes.
And I love this about you, that you are such a passionate baseball fan, because I don't really have a connection to any one sport myself. Right. And I'd love to know, because I hear you talk about baseball with friends, with my husband. What makes it such a great game to you? What does it stir up inside you that you just love?
Well, it's changing now. It doesn't have the strategy that it had. Even, I remember when I was watching baseball in the late 70s, I think the first full year I watched and understood baseball, I remember 78, 77, the Yankees winning the World Series, but I was too young to really grasp what was going on. I remember 1979, the Pittsburgh Pirates. Remember that song, We Are Family by Sister Sledge? That was their theme song. I remember seeing that on TV. But 1980 was the first year that I watched a full season of baseball. Started collecting baseball cards. And my dad, like I always said, was a very quiet guy. didn't really get involved too much in the raising of us. My mom basically took the reins, and it was just the personalities, my mom's personality compared to my dad's. But we had two bonds, my dad and I. Baseball was the biggest one, and music. Thankfully, both my parents liked music, but baseball was the one thing I had with my dad that we could sit and talk about baseball. And it's just the game is so different. For me, baseball, I love hockey, I like football, I like basketball, but there's a clock. In baseball, there's no clock. It's just innings, and you got to get those outs. And there used to be a strategy to baseball, stealing bases, bunting. It's changed a lot, but I still love it. It's just ingrained in me. Baseball was always ingrained in me. Now, my dad was a New York Mets fan because he was a New York Giants fan in the 50s when he was a kid in the 40s, but they moved to California with the Dodgers in 59. Then the Mets came along, and they kind of replaced the Dodgers and the Giants. And he was a Met fan. So how did I become a Yankee fan is when I was a kid in 1980, 81, the Mets were horrible. So my dad would put the Mets on, and he would get so frustrated at how bad they were that he would change the channel and put the Yankees on just so he could watch competitive baseball. So I started liking the Yankees from him switching the channel. Now, had the Mets been good in the early 80s and he stuck, I probably would have been a Mets fan. But, fate had it where I was a Yankee fan, and I'm happy I am. But I also support the locals here, the Braves. And
yeah. I know you're a big watcher here at home. So, what for you is the difference in enjoyment between being, at a game and just having it on at home? Do you concentrate at home, or is it more like background?
Well, yeah, at home, there's some Sundays where I'll sit and watch an entire game, every pitch, and pay attention, and I won't really scroll on my phone. But there are most nights I'll be doing both, on the phone and doing stuff. And it's just it's comforting in the background, just hearing, like I said, those voices that, that comfort you, that hearing those announcers. Now, it's not like when I was a kid and a lot of it was imagination. You listened to it on the radio. You had to be in bed at 8. And that Mickey Mouse radio over there on the shelf, I used to take that and put it under my pillow. It had a speaker on the back, and I would listen to the games. And you got, hearing those announcers' voices every night, they became part of your world. Yeah. And that's how it is now. Just having it on in the background and hearing the announcers, it's like a comforting thing every night for me.
Yeah, I love that. So what do you think is the stupidest sport or most random sport? And I will give you an example of something that I think is so random and ridiculous. The biathlon, skiing and then shooting. So go
I always wondered what that was all about. I guess, for anyone to become skilled in anything, because, I was an average runner for years. I understand now, being that I'm not active for the last couple of years, how much conditioning and everything takes. So I wouldn't really frown upon any one sport, because even if it's silly, there's somebody out there that's training and killing. And, I think anything with animals rubs me the wrong way. Like horse racing, okay, but you're not doing anything. You're riding a horse. It's all the horse. Or there's dog racing or anything with animals. Yeah. Kind of rubs me the wrong way, because the horse comes in. He doesn't even know what just happened. He knows he ran. He doesn't know what's going on. Right. He just wants the hay and the oats or whatever the hell he's eating. So I think anything with animals is kind of like, Yeah,
kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of.
Yeah. So you and your wonderful wife both grew up in New York, on Long Island. And so I want to know, what is something that is so incredibly different there that Southerners would have a hard time wrapping their minds around?
Well, I think you touched on it earlier. I think, everybody's got a different personality, but I think I noticed here in the South, and again, I like being here and I like the people, but I've noticed there's a little bit of fakeness here. I have to say. In New York, and maybe the way they do stuff here is better because it's kind of non-confrontational. Everybody gets along. Well, people try to get along, but I think I froze up for a second. My mind's. I think being forthright in New York and just saying what's on your mind, it just clears the air, and you're not fake. And there are phony people in New York, but I think being blunt. The food we spoke of, and I think, I don't like to get too political or but especially in the suburbs up in New York, and I know we've spoken about this privately, and a lot of people still don't believe it, but the biggest thing when we moved here to the South is, and I know it used to be the opposite, but the integration here in the South is much more Then up north, I mean, where I'm from in New York, on Long Island, it's still pretty much segregated. And it's been since the 40s and 50s. People migrated out of New York City to Long Island in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. A lot of white flight, they called it, set up their own towns. And it is still like that, where not that they beat up people and say, you can't come here, just certain groups of people, Hispanics, African Americans, just don't want the hassle of going into these white towns and trying to buy a house. So it is still very segregated. So when I see people on Facebook saying, from New York, from Long Island, saying diversity is great, and I'm saying to myself, how could you be saying that when you still promote this all white towns, and you got Hispanic towns and African American towns? And I grew up in a town where there were all white, only white people. I didn't see my first African American person until I used to go up to the supermarket where my parents worked, and they had African American employees working there. And when I got my first job in high school, was my first interactions with African American people. But I grew up my whole life sheltered from diversity. So I think that's something that people really don't. People think of New York, they think of this big melting pot, which it is in the metropolitan area, the 5 boroughs in New York City. But you go to Long Island and some of the upstate counties, it's like 1950s.
Right, and it sounds like you have a different perspective now being here in a great way, because I think it's one of the best parts of Atlanta is that we are so diverse.
When we moved here and we would go to restaurants and there was, it was just everybody eating together. Every race was eating, and we looked at each other, my wife and we were like, so this is how it's supposed to be, because in New York, it was just all white people sitting in a restaurant eating, and that's all you ever saw until you maybe went into a different town. But that was the biggest thing, that I think a lot of Southerners wouldn't understand, because then when they think of New York, they think of liberal, they think of melting pot, but it's really not like that in the suburbs.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Well, and you mentioned being in a restaurant with your wife. What is your favorite Southern food that you've come to love?
My favorite.
Do you have anything?
I've gotten to like black eyed peas, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
Southern barbecue. Now, I know my wife's vegan, as you know, and you guys are. But I do like the Southern barbecue. In New York, barbecue is different. People they throw a slab of meat on the grill. It's medium. They take it off. And there are some people that do some professional barbecue up in New York. For the most part, when you say you're going to barbecue, you throw some hot dogs on the grill and hamburgers. Yeah, that's your barbecue. In the South, the people smoke meat for days, and it's just falling apart. And the barbecue is different down here. I'm trying to think of what else we've had down here. With my wife being vegan, I haven't experienced a lot of the different, like, real traditional Southern foods because they're not really vegan.
Yeah, right.
So I haven't gone to a lot of I've been to a few barbecue places, but I'm trying to think of maybe along the vegan line. So black-eyed pea dishes and collard greens and that kind of stuff. Cornbread, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I like it all. I love food. So
just opening up the palate. So what's a Long Island specialty? And I know you've already spoken a little bit about New York food, but that you feel like all Southerners would benefit from experiencing.
As far as food?
As far as food, or just something that we don't experience here. I know you grew up you lived near the beach when you were a younger person.
Yeah, going to the beach. I mean, here it's like, you go to the beach, it's a vacation. You don't go for a day because you're 6 hours, 7 hours south, and how many hours east?
Right.
8 hours east. So just getting up and saying on a whim on any given day, let's go to the beach. Throwing your stuff in the trunk, and 10 minutes you're on the shore at the ocean. That's great. I mean, where else can you go? I mean, California, Long Island, different little seaside communities. But I think I got spoiled with it, though, because living 2 or 3 houses from the ocean in my later adult years before I got engaged and married, I would walk out of my house, go down the stairs, make a right, and 3 houses later, I'm on the dunes heading down to the beach. So you talk about spoiled. I never took it for granted, though, because once it was gone, I longed for it. So I really miss that.
Yeah, I bet you do. So another thing
and Billy Joel. You have to love Billy Joel. If you live on Long Island, folks, I mean, a lot of artists have come out of Long Island. Mariah Carey, Pat Benatar, a lot of artists. Too many to name. Billy Joel. You live on Long Island. You have to sign an agreement that you have to be a Billy Joel fan. And I noticed that with music is different. And there are certain songs that unite. Being a DJ both in New York and here in Atlanta. There are certain songs that no matter where you play in the country, music unites people. People are going to get up and dance and go crazy. But there are certain regional songs that if you played here in Atlanta, people wouldn't react the same. You play Piano Man by Billy Joel, any bar, any club, any wedding in New York, everyone in that room is going to sing Piano Man, every word with their beer in the air, their drink in the air at the top of their lungs. You're not going to get that here. You play Yeah by Usher here, which is something I played at every wedding. The place goes absolutely crazy. I think it should be the anthem of Georgia. You play that in New York, you might get some people dancing, but there are regional songs, I think, that people don't realize that go on in these different parts of the country that really excite people that don't. And then there are, like I said, the songs that no matter where you go, you can unite people and get everybody dancing. But there are some regional things that people don't realize.
Yeah. Well, we're glad that you have chosen the South to be your home for as long as we can have the McMahons. So you and I are both Italian.
Yes.
And with that comes a tendency towards a temper. And you've talked about that a lot. It takes a good bit to get me there, but when it happens, it's like a hot flare inside my chest, and it's like it's burning to get out. Right. When you get ready to get into it with somebody, what does it feel like when it's coming on?
Well, I think in a lot of cases, like especially in the book where I've confronted people, I think it's not only what that person did, but it was the 50 people before them, and it just compounded. And it was just building over the course of days where maybe I would bottle it up and I wouldn't go after the first person. And then finally I just had to it's like a pressure cooker. You have to let the steam out eventually before it explodes. So I think a lot of times I feel... for me, unless it's like something like, I love my dogs, but the dogs drive me crazy, so on. It's the little things that I yell at and get excited over more than big things, like around the house and stuff. Like anything, little things like the dog having an accident on the floor. I'm not going to hit the dog or anything, but I'll get frustrated because you have to clean it up and you're constantly cleaning up after the animals. Little things like that set me off in certain ways. It takes me a while, though, like I said, like the things in the book, for me to act on some of those. Sometimes they were spur of the moment, but I think a lot of the times it was just a culmination of this guy, and then the littlest things that would set me off, like, and that poor bastard would have to pay the price for the 30 people. And I think that's a lot of case when you go to a supermarket, people say, oh, that cashier was rude or nasty. You don't know the 30 people she just had before you. You might have been nice to her, and she should probably, or he should return that courtesy to you, but you don't know what they're going through in their life, or how many people just cursed them out, or what's going on in their home, or you got to give people a little slack, That's
so true. And it's funny that you say that, because it's taken me a good bit of therapy actually on the couch trying to figure that out, that you don't know what the person's been through who just gives you a dirty look or whatever, and it's good to remember.
I've gotten better. I think in my late teens and early 20s, I was pretty easygoing. Then I had a streak in my 20s and early 30s where I was kind of hot-headed. And then I've gotten calmer. I've gotten calmer over the years. But like I said, if something builds up and then I finally let the steam off. But I'm not I know I complain about people a lot on the show, but I don't think I'm an unhappy person for the most part. I think I'm a pretty happy person for the most part, but there are these mutants that we talk about and things out in public that just set me the wrong. People don't think about other people.
Yeah.
That's what drives me crazy.
Like every single time.
Every time.
Yeah. So if you could do anything in the world right now and money was no object, what would that thing be?
I've never really traveled. I would like to see certain parts of the world, although I don't feel very safe traveling nowadays with everything that's going on. I'd like to go to Ireland, where my family, my dad's side of the family is from. Italy, I'd like to see. I always wanted to see like Australia, New Zealand. I like Aruba and those type of tropical places. So I would do some traveling. As far as a job goes, like I said, I would like to be on the radio. It could be a little rural station. I don't know, although I probably wouldn't fit into a rural station very well. But something in the radio business, even behind the scenes, it wouldn't matter. Just something like that as far as a job goes. Yeah.
So I have this deep-seated desire to, like in a flash, at the end of my life, have all the answers to the great mysteries of the world answered in like this beautiful movie montage.
Right.
I want to know, what are the great mysteries of the world that you would want revealed to you?
Well, there are a couple. I want to know what happened. I know you think I'm crazy. I want to know what happened with the Kennedy assassination.
Oh, I know. That's probably everybody's like number one.
I mean, I have some ideas. I want to know what really happened on 9/11. I don't think we were told the real story there. I don't think it's this far crazy conspiracy theory that some people say that planes didn't even hit the World Trade Center. I mean, we saw the planes hit. But there are things that we don't know about that. Even that, and I know it's not that big, but 300 people lost their lives, or a few hundred, that TWA Flight 800 off Long Island in 1996. Military shot that down. It was covered up. I would want to know things like that. But you could maybe, from a scientific standpoint, there are things I want to see before I want to see a cure for cancer. I want to see that unlocked. I want to see. And it frustrates me because I thought, growing up and what I was learning in school, that we'd be so far ahead of where we are now, not only from a medical standpoint, but from an infrastructure standpoint. Now, I don't expect flying cars. People can't even drive on the highway. But I'm talking about public transportation systems, monorails. We had the Concorde that could fly to London in a couple hours. We don't even have that anymore. Space travel, that's been cut. NASA used to be the premier organization in the world, the space shuttle. I feel like we've regressed in a lot of ways. So I want to see us expand to that. I don't know how many years I have left. If everything runs its course, maybe I have 30 years left if I live to a normal life expectancy. So I think of how much has happened in the last 30 years. I talked about my prom last week was the 30th anniversary. So 30 years is a pretty decent time. So if I have 30 years left, God willing, I would like to see a lot more progress in those areas. I thought we'd be much further ahead. Even, without getting political, people dying from simple things because they can't afford health insurance. And I mean, where are we as a country and as a society that we think everyone having health insurance is a radical idea?
Right.
Well, where are we? I mean, is this America?
Yeah.
So it troubles me. I thought we'd be a lot further ahead, but it seems like we've taken a lot of steps back in a lot of areas where I thought we'd be so far ahead of everyone. We kind of, as a country, we rested on our laurels. We were so far ahead in the 50s and 60s of everybody, and then we kind of just sat back and watched everyone catch up and pass us, and it's sad.
Yeah, and I think growing up as kids in the 80s, we really were told that a lot of these things would go further faster.
Yeah. The only thing that really came true, I remember I'm going to say this was in La Freak by Chic was out, because I can remember, it was like 78. So I was in second grade, and we went into the sixth grade classroom, and they decorated the classroom of what the year 2000 was going to look like.
Oh, wow.
And we got to experience this as second graders. And I remember the one thing that came true, that's coming true, is that they said there wasn't going to be money anymore. Everything was going to be on like a debit, like we have now. And a lot of people are carrying cash. There's still cash out there. But I think we're heading in a direction where there's not going to be money anymore. But all that other space age crap never took place.
Didn't come.
No, we're still riding these old trains. We don't even have a train system here.
I know. Which is an entire story for another time. But so, and you share so many incredible, funny, and I would say sometimes cringeworthy stories from your time growing up with all of us, your listeners.
Right.
What is your happiest memory from being a kid?
Well, if I had to pick moments in general, any time I spent with my grandparents, and I say this all the time, my parents, they worked hard. We struggled a lot. If it wasn't for my grandparents, we wouldn't have had a childhood. They contributed financially, emotionally. My parents weren't very touchy-feely, loving type parents where kissed you, encouraged you, hugged you. That was my grandparents. So without them, I don't even want to think about what my childhood would have been like. It would have been a very empty, scary, not that my parents are bad people, but my grandparents, I was lucky enough, my grandfather lived till I was 15, and my grandmother, although she didn't know who we were, she had Alzheimer's, she lived till I was, I guess, in my 20s. But if it wasn't for them, so I would say any moment with them. But if I had to pick one, I know it's going to sound totally petty and crazy. We mentioned baseball before, and I was in Little League. And I think this was after the bullying years, but I was a decent fielder, but I sucked. I couldn't hit. I was afraid of the ball. I would get up to the plate, and the coaches started not having confidence in me, and I was striking out every time I came up. And it was just one day I just got angry, and I said, I'm not going to be afraid of this ball anymore. And they, pitcher, there was a couple of men on. It was a tie game in the last inning, and I hit a double off the center field wall and won the game for the team. And I'll never forget the feeling of that ball hitting the bat. It felt like I was hitting like a tennis ball. It felt so, I just hit it right on the right spot. And the feeling of winning a game after being like the loser for so long is that memory stands out for me. Other than like the family and the grandparent story, just a singular moment that always sticks out for me for some reason.
Magic. One of those magic moments.
It was. And it just... I didn't get the game ball because the coach's son pitched the game and he only gave up 2 runs. He ended up getting the game ball. And I was a little upset after that game, but I will never forget that.
Yeah.
Because it turned my whole confidence around. I was never a star player after that, but it changed my approach after that. And it was a good feeling.
That's great. Everyone knows that you are passionate about music. Music
Yes.
is your life, and you'd love to share it with the people in your life. And
anytime I can talk about music.
yes, yes. And you even had an episode where, as you've mentioned before, my husband Benji came on, and you talked about the Music Hall of Fame, shame, and lame.
Yep.
So let's dig into this passion of yours a little bit
sure.
more. What do you think is the best use of pop music in an 80s or early 90s movie? And I have a couple examples if you need a little starter. So I'll give you my starter. The Oh Yeah song from Ferris Bueller.
Oh, sure.
And it was also in The Secret of My Success.
Well, there are certain iconic, you hear the song, you don't even think about the artist of the song, you think about the movie. The movie just automatically pops into your head. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is Footloose.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
that wasn't even on my list. Yeah, totally.
And not just the Kenny Loggins, the Let's Hear It for the Boy.
Mm-hmm.
That whole soundtrack was iconic. 84 was a great year. Flashdance. I mean, you hear Maniac, I'm doing the moves like Jennifer Beals in the room there.
Right.
I'm trying not to pull a muscle like
Right.
I did the other night dancing to Madonna. Even movies that maybe weren't my favorite, but any movie like Looking for Love from Urban Cowboy.
Mm-hmm.
I hear that Looking for Love by Johnny Lee. I picture John Travolta in that bar.
Yeah.
Obviously, Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds from The Breakfast Club. I mean, you think about that movie when you hear that song.
Yeah.
Ghostbusters. I mean, what's Ghostbusters without the theme? Even though they stole the music from Huey Lewis, but that's a whole nother story. Those type of, I love movies, but I was always more of a music guy. And I think, I guess it falls into the early 90s. When you hear the instrumental piano interlude in Layla, I always think of Goodfellas, where they find all the bodies.
Yeah.
After the mob, takes out all those people who they thought were going to get caught or snitch. They call it the piano edit of Layla. I always think of Goodfellas.
Yeah.
So Goodfellas came out in 90, so I guess that falls under that time period.
Yeah.
But things like that.
It gives you it's like you're very good at painting word pictures, I feel like.
Yes.
And I think that must appeal. Like what you're saying is that the song brings you to a scene.
Yeah, and I mean, any Prince song from that Purple Rain soundtrack, when doves cry, you can't picture him riding that motorcycle, those big handlebars with his little legs up on the... I mean...
He was so small, yeah. But he was so small but amazing. For sure. I don't know if all the listeners know this, but you are a music countdown savant. And what I mean by that is I can give you a week or a month in the 70s or 80s, and you're most likely able to, calling on those word pictures that I was just saying, tell me what was going on in pop culture and like the songs that made at least the top 3 at that time.
Okay.
And so how does that work in your brain?
Okay, now if you just came to me and said, what was the top 3 songs 30 years ago today? I might be able to come up one of the 3. But what happens is when I start a countdown from the beginning, it's through a process of elimination in my head. I remember what grade I was in, who I was hanging out with, what season it was. Because every year, like obviously if you tell me songs from 1983, there's 4 seasons. I break it down to seasons. Whether I was in the house in the winter, I can remember being in the house. It's cold in New York, I'm in the house. The springtime, the summertime obviously, and then the fall and Christmas time. So I can break it down in my mind to what season it was based on what I was doing. If I was out at a pool, and then I break it down as the songs go on, process of elimination. Okay, they played that. Then I start thinking, what's left? It's like a process of elimination. And usually when I get to the top 15, top 10, I can name you the top 3. Sometimes I could do it right off the top after a few songs.
Yeah.
But it's usually when I get down to the top 20, I can usually break it, and it's just, like I said, it's through the process of elimination, getting the feel for what was going on in that time. It's like a feeling comes over my body where I feel like I'm back in that time. Like I hear Wishing Well by Terrence Trent D'Arby. I'm driving in the car with my friend Anthony and his dad going to take the SATs.
Oh, wow.
Like that specific. Like
That's
I can
very
remember what was
specific.
on the radio going to do. I can remember hearing songs on the radio when I was going for my vaccinations as a 5-year-old in the car.
Oh, wow. Like what? What do you
Killing Me
remember?
Softly by Roberta Flack. I never liked that song because it reminded me of getting shots when I was a kid. But with music, I am like almost like Rain Man, where it brings me like I like a laser. My mind focuses in on that specific moment, and then I can narrow it down to the season, the year, and sometimes the week.
Yeah. So I want to run one by you.
Oh,
I don't know if you can do it since you were saying it has to come from like 20 and above.
Okay.
But this would be your birthday week in 1987. So the week ending in July 18th. I'm going to give you one song and then see if you can sort of get the picture. Number 10 at that time was "Rhythm Is Gonna Get You" by Gloria Estefan. Yeah.
Well, I can name all songs from that summer. Right on Track by The Breakfast Club. Whitney Houston was out, I Want to Dance with Somebody.
Yes, that was number 3.
I know what number 1 was. Keep Me Hanging On by Kim Wilde.
Oh,
was that number 1?
Not that week, but it was. It's something from Heart.
Alone.
Yes, you got it. See, listeners, he is amazing at this.
I can. My birth. Oh, see, I'm thinking. See, that's where I slipped. I'm thinking this week in '87. So I had to fast forward another month. Mm-hmm. Now I'm trying to think what number 2 was. How about? Give me the artist.
Little clue. Okay, it was Bob Seger.
Oh, Shakedown.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So but I can remember if we went down the countdown, I could start getting a feel for that whole summer. But I remember Rhythm Is Gonna Get You. I remember a lot of those songs from I can time capsule what I was doing that summer, where I was living, who I was hanging out with, and all the songs that were like it. Like we always say, it's a soundtrack to our life. It really is, because we always had the radio on, and it was just the background soundtrack to whatever was going on in our lives.
Yeah. So you've talked about this on the podcast before, and you just talked about it a little bit. I was going to ask about your top 2 concerts, but it's kind of a couple of questions that I had at once.
Yeah,
Because you said you've seen Springsteen.
Yeah.
Did you say 30 times?
32 or 33 times in 8 different cities, yeah.
Oh, my God, that is so amazing.
It's funny, we were just talking about that tonight, one of the concerts before, my wife and I, before you got here, one of the concerts.
So, set the scene of the best Springsteen show that you've seen, that you've experienced.
I've got to say, too, the first time I ever saw him, the 20-year anniversary is coming up. I think it's August 2nd or August 6th. I have the stub over there. I actually wrote an article for a classic rock magazine, and they put it in their book of people's experiences with Springsteen. And I sent them a picture of the shirt I got. You got to understand, Springsteen, after Born in the USA, he disbanded from the E Street Band. I mean, that was all the big names, Clarence Clemens, Stephen Van Zandt, and kind of went solo for a few years. Did a couple of solo albums in 87 and 90, Human Touch, Tunnel of Love. It was decent stuff. But I never got to see him with the E Street Band. And in 1999, he did a tour called the E United instead of Reunited.
Right.
And they were coming to New Jersey. And I was dating a girl at the time, and her best friend got an extra ticket. Now, it was kind of an awkward thing because her friend knew that I loved Springsteen. So how do you ask your best friend, can your boyfriend go with me to the concert? But the girl I was dating was moving to Florida in a couple of months anyway, and she said, I don't care, go. And I remember driving to Jersey, the anticipation, I was with this girl and her older sister and the sister's husband. And this was the girl Regina's favorite first time seeing Bruce Springsteen also. And I remember getting to the arena. It was about an hour or two before. And there was all these different crazy things going on in the parking lot, like karaoke type things and buying the T-shirts and all that. But I remember going into the Continental Airlines Arena. And the only thing I could describe it as is like the lights were out, and then they said, the lights came on a little bit, and they said, ladies and gentlemen, and they started announcing each band member, and he would come out, and when they said, ladies and gentlemen, Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, and the lights went up, and he hit that first chord, and I even remember the song. It was Adam Raised a Cane off the Darkness on the Edge of Town. I didn't cry, but I welled up I'm getting emotional thinking about it now. But hearing that and finally getting to see Bruce Springsteen and then the 20-year anniversary. So I would say that. Mm-hmm. And then there was a concert. I told the story about meeting Joan Jett in a supermarket.
And you made her laugh, too.
Yes. And I was on my way to the Bruce Springsteen concert. Mm-hmm. He played at Giant Stadium. It was an outdoor summer concert, July 24th, 2003. I've even found clips online on YouTube. People have put everything. He played for almost 4 hours that night, and I was just telling my wife that every song that I had never heard him play before that night that I wanted him to play, he unloaded the tank that night and played everything that night. Oh. I left there like I ran a marathon, emotionally drained. So I would say those two concerts of Bruce Springsteen. But I was lucky enough to see Tom Petty a dozen times. Mm-hmm. He stands out. I used to go, if I can just jump in real quick.
Please.
I was lucky enough to live and work near Jones Beach, which was a big amphitheater right on the Atlantic Ocean where a lot of artists would come and play. It was an outdoor theater. And there would be times where my job would be 20 minutes from there. And I would ask around everybody at work, do you want to go to a concert tonight? You can just pick up tickets if it wasn't a sold-out show or get them in the parking lot. I can't tell you how many times people didn't want to go to a concert where, like people say I go to the movies alone. I would just drive down after work, get a ticket in the parking lot, sit with people I didn't know, bond over music, and just have the best. I can't tell you, the summer of 99, 2000, how many. I must have gone to 15, 20 concerts alone where I just said, screw it, I'm going to this concert tonight. And those were some of the best concerts I ever saw. Van Morrison, John Mellencamp, Steve Miller, anybody. I would just go and just go. I didn't care who wanted to go, who didn't want to go.
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of the essence of Charlie is that you make friends wherever you go, especially when music's involved.
Yeah, it was great.
For sure. So, you and I have only come to near fisticuffs one time in our entire friendship.
I don't remember that.
Well, it is over. Whether Queen or the Eagles are a better band. I, of course, say Queen because I love their music and I love their theatricality and Freddie Mercury. Hello. Right. But you think it's the Eagles, and I want you to tell the listeners why.
Well, if you were looking for just a show, a front man that's going to put on a show, Freddie Mercury is going to blow away Don Henley or Glenn Frey. But when you talk about the body of work, and I guess it's more about what the songs of the Eagles meant to me growing up and now as an adult. And I spoke to a friend yesterday about this, Phil online, Amanda, who's been on the show. This is her brother. And we spoke about songs that we listened to as kids and would sing along to, but now as adults take on a whole different meaning. And a lot of those Eagles songs do for me. But I think the body of work of the Eagles, and to me, the Eagles, people talk about if any band you can think of that are great always came from England. Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, I could go on and on. But when you talk about the greatest American band that ever was assembled, I mean, people can argue Aerosmith, Van Halen, but I say it's the Eagles. I mean, Glenn Frey, the duo of Glenn Frey and Don Henley is the American equivalent of McCartney and Lennon, in my opinion. And then to have Joe Walsh and Timothy B. Schmidt and the rest of the crew there, to me, it's, if you want a front man and you want flamboyance and you want, then absolutely it's Queen. But to me, if you want a full body of work and songs with deep, not saying Queen didn't have great songs or with some meaningful songs, but for me, the Eagles' body of work and the meaning behind their songs, that's why I would pick them.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, you've talked, with Benji on the Hall of Shame, Hall of Fame episode, what constitutes rock and roll at this point? Do you feel that that they are an exemplar of rock?
The Eagles?
For the United States?
Yeah, if someone came to me and said, name the greatest American rock band, it's the Eagles.
It would be the Eagles.
Yeah, I don't think there's no debate. You can say Aerosmith, you could throw maybe Bon Jovi in there. I'm just trying to think, because it's so hard when you think of the greatest bands. It's always British, sometimes Australian, AC/DC, but it's usually always British. And then you could say, the Ramones, but they were more influential. They didn't have the body of work to constitute the greatest American band. When you're talking a full catalog, body of work, and just talent, member by member, it's hard for me not to pick the Eagles when you're talking about an American band.
And do you have a favorite Eagles song?
Wow, that's tough. I would say Take It to the Limit if I had to pick one. Yeah, that's Randy Meisner was the vocals on that, and it was just an outstanding song. I know a lot of people like Take It Easy, but Take It to the Limit for me is where it's at.
Yeah. That doesn't surprise me. It's not the obvious choice. It's a quality choice, Charlie. So you mentioned when I had asked you about, things that you would like to know about world secrets, world mysteries, the Concorde from, supersonic travel. And that's something that I wish I could have taken part in, the golden age of travel and supersonic travel. And I know that my husband would have loved to have gone to tapings of like pretty much any season of Match Game, the game show.
Right.
I want to know if there is some part of history that you have a great nostalgia for but didn't take part in that if you could have your wish, you would take part in.
Yeah, two things. But we're kind of reliving it. I always was fascinated with the 1960s, the civil rights movement. It's, you know why? Because I envy the people. Now, the baby boomers, I have mixed emotions on. They marched in the streets in the 60s for civil rights, for workers' rights, against the war in Vietnam, not against the military, but against the war that was going on there. There's a big difference. And people say, oh, these hippies, they were against the military. No, they weren't. They were against what our government was doing there. People had balls and took to the streets, and they kind of sold out the baby boomers, and they're kind of responsible for the condition the world's in now. But I envy that generation. I envy that decade because a lot of tragedy happened. The country in 1968 was probably one of the worst years in history with Dr. King being assassinated, Robert Kennedy being assassinated, the Democratic National Convention, the riots in Chicago. But I'm fascinated with the 60s. It's because I envy the way people stood up. And we were very divided because of what was going on in the country. But I always said I always wanted to live through those times. And I feel like I kind of am now. And I've asked people. I've asked my in-laws. I've asked older people that I'm friends with. Johnny B. You lived through the 60s. Compare the 60s to what's going on right now. How divided we are as a country. And, you could say it's the president. You could say, but we've been becoming further and further apart for 15, 20 years now. I don't think who's in office now helps the situation, but I don't think he's fully responsible for it. But I think we are becoming more divided each year, and I don't know if we can heal this because social media wasn't around in the 60s. That fuels it. There's a lot of things that fuel it now that weren't around back then. So I would say the 60s, but also for a fun and not so serious thing, I would have loved to have been legal age, 18 to 21, during the height of the disco era, to go to Studio 54.
Yes, I knew you would say that.
I love all music, but, people shit on disco, excuse the expression, for a while there after disco left. But let me tell you something about disco. Horn sections, string sections, vocals. You had everything in disco. Even some rock bands went disco when disco. Miss You by the Rolling Stones. I Wish I Could Fly Like Superman by the Kinks. Do You Think I'm Sexy by Rod Stewart. Even these rock stars had to go kind of disco. Copacabana by Barry Manilow. They all went kind of disco. But let me tell you something about disco. Where else are you going to get strings and horns and all this stuff? Earth, Wind, and Fire, all these bands, Chic. I would have loved to have been on just one night in Studio 54 just to see what it was all about, or just old enough to go to any disco, because disco music brought the gay community had a lot to do with disco, and it brought people together. In Studio 54 was known for everybody just, didn't matter what color you were, what sexual orientation you were. People just got under those lights and danced and had a great time, and just, they were free with who they were. And that was something I would love to experience. No judgment. People just went and they danced, they had a good time. And that disco music, I don't know why there was such a backlash against it at the end, but I would have loved to have been old enough. I remember it, seeing it on TV as a kid. Yeah. I didn't understand what was going on, but I would have loved to been part of that whole thing. Yeah.
Well, we share a passion for disco. For sure. It does seem like a more open and accepting in time when you see footage of that time of disco, it feels more hopeful and inclusive, I feel like.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So, all right. I have just a few more questions for you, Charlie.
Okay.
You are a strong believer in having to ring the bell with your elbows when you arrive as a guest at someone's house because you brought so much food and so many gifts. And I have to admit to all of the listeners today, we only brought one gift today when we showed up for the taping, but I was a little nervous ahead of time preparing my questions. So describe for your listeners the ideal ring the bell with your elbows setup when you arrive at someone's house.
Well, let me tell you something. I gotta say, Benji and Claire and Johnny B and his wife Renee, probably in my whole life some of the most generous people we've ever come across. They never come here to the house, and we host a lot here because it's a pain to get out sometimes with the dogs, and they all have medical problems, so they're gracious enough to come here and always come here with something, or many things I should say, shopping bags, unloading. It's just, and I know I joke about it, but I don't want my joke about it to make you feel obligated to do that.
No, I think it's great. I think we really agree on having too much food when you have people over.
Yeah, you have to have too much. It's just, maybe it's Italian thing, maybe it's not, but always, on any given night in my house growing up, somebody could just drop by. 4 people could drop by. There was food for everybody. And that's just, I don't know, it's just ingrained in us, I guess, right?
Yeah.
But you guys are the same way when we go. See, we always feel, folks, when you go to when you go to Claire's house, Benji and Claire's house, you feel like you're getting the VIP royal treatment, okay? The fine china comes out. You're just having coffee. They come over here, here's lemonade in a Solo cup. I get the fine crystal. I get the fine everything over at the...
Oh, my gosh. Now, don't believe this, because Jen and Charlie are truly some of the best hosts ever.
Well, the thing about hosting, my whole idea, I love hosting. My whole idea is when I have people over is, and when people come here, I want them to feel like they're in their own house, comfortable, never longing for anything. Whatever they want, they can have. There's plenty. They don't feel like they're being judged because they're eating too much or too little or whatever. That's the way I host. I just want people to come and have a good time and, not long for anything or feel like, that's the whole fun behind it.
Yeah. And I think you make people feel like it's a giant hug when they come over.
Well, real quick, food was always that way growing up. I mean, I mentioned earlier that my grandparents were more the affectionate type. Mm-hmm. My mom and dad, especially they weren't very affectionate, but that was the affection in the house. Mm-hmm. Food. You got consoled with food. You got rewarded with food. Yeah. I remember a time where I don't know what I did, and that was back when your parents hit you. Mm-hmm. I remember one time, I don't know what the hell I did, but I got smacked around by my mom, and she must have felt guilty about it. And then the next thing I heard, as the swelling on it was going down,
oh, no.
Come on, let's have ice cream. Mm-hmm. So it was always, all right, that was the peace offering, the ice cream, the whatever it was, the dessert. That was always the show of love and the peace offering.
Yeah. It has a special place, I think, in Italian homes, for sure. All right, so last thing, I have a lightning round.
Okay.
Of questions, and this is sort of a mix of, if anybody's ever watched the Inside the Actor Studio Proust question.
Lightning round, folks.
Yeah, and just things that I think will show us all.
So it's like the first thing that comes to my mind?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, more about Charlie. So.
Okay.
All right. What is your favorite word or phrase?
You can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit no matter how much mayonnaise you use.
Oh my God, that's awesome. What is your favorite curse word?
Cocksucker.
Sound that you hate.
Stirring in a metal pot with a metal utensil.
That's a bad one. All right, sound that you love.
Music.
Favorite Seinfeld scene.
The marble rye, when they're tossing the rye bread up to George's son. Jerry's trying to get the marble rye up to George so he can place it back because his parents took the bread that they brought.
That's awesome. Best cereal of the 80s.
Apple Jacks.
Best cereal of all time.
Fruit Loops.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Donna Summer or Sister Sledge?
For total body of work, Donna Summer.
All right.
Look.
Yeah.
First album I ever officially owned, too, was Donna Summer.
Oh, yeah. So everyone, he has the Donna Summer on the radio. This is the 2 volumes.
Now, that reminds me of my sister, because when we finally got our own record collection, that was the first album we got.
Yeah. And I remember listening to that, too. I don't know how my parents had that, but they had that also. I remember opening that up and
that's amazing.
Looking at all the pictures. She was so incredible. Barry Manilow or Christopher Cross?
Christopher Cross.
What's your spirit animal?
Probably Beagle.
Oh, yeah. I would agree I would agree with you on that. You're relatively open to the possibility of ghosts or spirits in our world. Do you think that the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot or the Yeti could be real?
No.
If you could have someone narrate your life as you go through each day, who would you want it to be?
Bob Costas.
That's awesome. I wouldn't have guessed that one. What TV show character would be most fun to change places with for a week?
Larry David from Curb Your Enthusiasm.
I should have guessed that, but I didn't guess that. Would you rather be able to teleport anywhere at any time or be able to fly?
Teleport.
If you had to live without the internet or without heat and AC for the rest of your life, which would you choose?
Internet.
Which was the best?
Get rid of the internet, in other words. I want my heat. I want my heat and
That
AC.
surprises me.
Yeah.
That surprises me because you're so inquisitive. I would have thought you would have chosen.
No, I gotta be. When I start getting warm in the summer, I get. You talked about Tampa before,
Right.
Don't put that heat above 74. That AC above 74.
Right. What was the best thing you ever spent money on?
Engagement ring for my wife.
Oh, that's so sweet. Beach or mountains?
Beach.
And you sort of answered this one already. What job would you like to do tomorrow that you've never done before? And you said...
Move over Howard Stern. No, just any radio.
Yeah. Well, that's it, Charlie. This has been so much fun for me. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. See, there was nothing to be. We were all
Yeah.
we were both, I think, a little nervous of us because I didn't know what to expect.
For sure.
So, folks, if you love the podcast, and if you're new to the podcast, you want to tell your friends about it, where are we available? Instead of saying on most podcast platforms, because a lot of people don't know what that is, where are we? We're on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Radio Public, Radio.com, Stitcher, CastBox, and YouTube. If you have one of those little Amazon Echo devices, just say, Alexa, play the podcast, A Bunch of Malarkey, and she will play the latest episode. Also, as Claire mentioned, check out my book, A Whole Lot of Shenanigans. It's available on Amazon, and if you'd like a personalized signed copy, you can go to eBay. Just put A Whole Lot of Shenanigans in the search bar, and I will get that out to you. So, folks, whether you're listening to music, eating some Italian food, teleporting, no matter what you're doing, anything that we discussed today, you always have to beware. And why is that? It's a shit show out there. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. This has been A Bunch of Malarkey. We'll talk to you next week. Take care, everybody.